I'm not just making that up. I actually saw it happen in the text. Turn to Acts chapter 10. I want to show you something else that Luke wrote for us. It's a story that happened to Peter that is so eerily similar to the one we just read, it's uncanny. And the similarities, the parallels are absolutely stunning. And what we're going to see is we're going to see Peter. Okay, so Peter observed this conversation and all this stuff going on in Luke chapter 7. And then Jesus went to the cross and died, and Jesus rose again from the dead, and Jesus ascended to the Father, and then Jesus sent the Spirit to indwell Peter. And then Peter had this experience. And so these stories are almost identical. The difference is in the first story, it was Jesus. In the second story, it was Jesus in Peter. But in seeing this second story, we're going to see how Jesus wants to live through us as far as racism is concerned. So in Acts chapter 10, verse 1, at Caesarea, there was a man named Cornelius, a centurion. Ding, 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 parallel number 1. In what was known as an Italian regiment, so he was a Gentile. He and all his family were devout and God-fearing. He gave generously to those in need, and he prayed to God regularly. So he was kind towards the Jewish people around him. He was generous, just like our centurion in Luke. One day at about 3 p.m, he had a vision. He distinctly saw an angel of God who came to him and said, "Cornelius." Cornelius stared at him in fear. Can you imagine if an angel showed up and called you by name? "What is it, Lord?" he asked. The angel answered, "Your prayers and gifts to the poor have come up as a memorial offering to God. Now send men to Joppa to bring back a man named Simon who's called Peter. He's staying with another guy named Simon, the tanner, whose house is by the sea." When the angel who spoke to him had gone, Cornelius called 2 of his servants and a devout soldier who was one of his attendants, and he told them everything that had happened. Listen, and he sent them to Joppa. Ding, 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 parallel number 3. I'm going to go get someone to come and do something important for me. I'm not going to go. He's a Jew. I'm a Gentile. But I'm going to send some people to get him. About noon the following day, as they were on their journey, so this is already, wheels are already in motion, Peter's completely oblivious to it, and approaching the city, Peter went up on the roof to pray. He became hungry and wanted something to eat, and while the meal was being prepared, he fell into a trance, or he had a vision. And he saw heaven opened and something like a large sheet being let down to earth by its 4 corners. It contained all kinds of 4-footed animals as well as reptiles and birds. If you've been reading in Leviticus lately, you would recognize those descriptions of those words as animals and birds that are unclean, not allowed to eat them if you're a Jew. Then a voice said, "Peter, get up, kill, and eat." To which he said, "Surely not, Lord." That's an oxymoron, by the way. You can't say surely, you can't say no, Lord. If you say no, then he's not your Lord. And if he is your Lord, you can't say no. So if he's your Lord, you say yes. The answer is yes. What's the question is how you respond to a Lord. Peter said, "No, Lord." And the reason he did is because he had been raised since he was a little boy that you never touch those animals. Never. And now it seemed like God was telling him to eat them. "Surely not, Lord," Peter replied. "I've never eaten anything impure or unclean in my entire life." The voice spoke to him a second time. "Do not call anything impure that God has made clean." Okay, so God's about to rock Peter's world. He's setting him up for this. You ready? Verse 16. This happened 3 times. Peter usually took a while to grasp things. So this scene that we just read about happened 3 times. So 3 times he heard God say to him, "Do not call anything impure that God has made clean. Do not call anything impure that God has made clean. Do not call anything impure that God has called or made clean." 3 times. And then the sheet was taken back to heaven. Verse 17, while Peter was wondering about the meaning of the vision, so Peter's sitting there going, "What in the world was that? Been raised since I was knee-high to a grasshopper not to touch any of those things. And now this thing just came out of the sky and God told me to eat. I am so confused." While he was grappling with the meaning of the vision, the men sent by Cornelius found out where Simon's house was and stopped at the gate. And they called out, asking if Simon, who was known as Peter, was staying there. Verse 19, listen. While Peter was still thinking about the vision, he's still going, "What in the world was that? That didn't make any sense. While Peter was still thinking about the vision, the Spirit said to him, underline this, the Spirit said to him, circle that, put stars all around it. We're talking about new covenant living, friends. We're talking about this new way of the Spirit, that the Spirit of Christ had come to indwell Peter so that the Spirit of Christ could prompt him and empower him and enable him to live the way Jesus lived when he was on this earth. And the Spirit said to him, Simon, 3 men are looking for you. So get up and go downstairs. Do not hesitate to go with them, for I have sent them. Do not hesitate. Underline those words, do not hesitate. The words do not mean not even one time. Not even one time. The word hesitate is a fascinating word. It's the word diakrino. It's a compound word, dia, which means from, denoting separation. Diakrino, judgment, segregation, deciding, distinguishing. So what he's saying is, do not judge. Diakrino. Kind of sounds like discriminate, doesn't it? Similar roots. Do not discriminate. To discriminate means to judge and to set yourself apart from someone else. And what the Spirit said to Peter was, okay, Peter, there's 3 men that are coming to talk to you. He didn't tell them they were Gentiles. Here's all he said. Do not discriminate and go with them. Those were the marching orders that Peter got. Do not discriminate and go. So in verse 21, Peter went down and he said to the men, I'm the one you're looking for. Why have you come? He responded to the Spirit. He obeyed, even though I'm sure this was uncomfortable for him. And the men replied, we have come from Cornelius the centurion. I wonder in their description how long it took for Peter to recall what happened in Luke chapter 7. We've come from Cornelius, a centurion. A centurion. I remember Jesus having an interaction with a centurion once. He is a righteous and God-fearing man who is respected by all the Jewish people. Oh, that sounds like that guy in Luke 7. He wouldn't have said it that way, of course. A holy angel told him to ask you to come to his house so that he could hear what you have to say. That sounds familiar too. That other centurion sent men to ask Jesus to come. The Spirit prompted me to come talk to these guys. And he said, do not discriminate. They're Gentiles, but he said, do not discriminate. And oh yeah, he had me eating all those foods I wasn't supposed to eat either. Oh, don't call something impure that I have made clean. Verse 23. Then Peter said, what are you, nuts? You guys are Gentiles. No, he didn't. That's not what he said. What did he say? Or what did he do? Then Peter invited the men into the house. Underline that. Circle it. Put stars all around it. He invited them into his house to be his guests. This is the first time this has happened in decades in Israel. Jews didn't invite Gentiles into their house. They just didn't do it. This is a cultural barrier broken. This is a racial barrier broken. Why? Because Jesus was living in him. The racial barrier breaker was living in him, and he was surrendered to him. And as we surrender to him, he's going to do this in us too. The next day, Peter started out. Underline that. Peter started to go with them, just like Jesus went with them. See, Peter went towards them too. And some of the believers from Joppa went along. The following day, he arrived in Caesarea. Cornelius was expecting them, and he had called together his relatives and close friends. He'd filled his house with all his friends and his relatives. As Peter entered the house, underline that, circle it, put stars around it. You might know this by now, but Jews didn't enter Gentiles' houses. This is a huge statement. As Peter entered the house, probably the outer courtyard is what we're thinking about right now, Peter went toward them. Cornelius met him and fell at his feet in reverence, but Peter made him get up. Stand up, he said, I'm only a man myself. While talking with him, Peter went inside the house. So now he's moved from the courtyard into the very house. Peter is moving towards them. And he found a large gathering of people, of Gentile people. And he said to them, listen to these words. This is stunning. You are well aware that it is against our law for a Jew to associate with or visit a Gentile. I mean, think about this for a second. He just walked into a room full of Gentiles, and the first thing he says is, you know what, I'm not supposed to be with you people. You know I'm not supposed to be here, right? How's that for just like developing rapport right off the bat? Yeah. Not supposed to be here with you guys. But, listen to these words. God has shown me that I should not call anyone impure or unclean. Is that what God showed him? God showed him all the animals and said, don't call anything unclean that I've made clean. Peter got the message. I'm not supposed to call anyone unclean. But God has shown me that I should not call anyone impure or unclean. This, my friends, what I just read to you, is the position that Jesus takes on racism. Let me say it again. God has shown us that we should not call anyone impure or unclean.